fucking go.
1, 2, 3, 4.
This is the ending of 28 years later, and this is the opening scene. And as strange as it may seem,
How's that?
both make sense. They rhyme with each other,
Hello?
not only because they share Jimmy's participation, but also because both declare intentions in similar ways. Both break the rules established by their genre. Both use music and costume design in unconventional and symbolic ways. And both warn us about the themes to come in the story. One for its first chapter, and the other for its sequel. And the two contrast in how the characters are both transformed through the abandonment of the father figure. But to understand them both, one must understand the entire film. In the opening, the fall of Scotland, violent and filled with death, is presented alongside a dissonant sound-image relationship.
Yes.
Joyful contrapuntal music, atypical not only for dramatic apocalyptic cinema, but even atypical for the saga itself. This folk song seems to welcome the apocalypse rather than frame it as tragic or terrifying.
Yes, my children! Yes!
And it sounds this way because that is exactly what it's doing, welcoming the birth of something. To evolve the saga into this new trilogy, Danny Boyle and Alex Garland stop antagonizing the zombie as a simple monster and begin to explore it through the complexity of social otherness. Social otherness is a philosophical and sociological concept that describes how identity is constructed through the recognition of an other, an individual or group different from oneself or one's own collective. This other is defined by what it is not, creating a us versus them distinction. In Modernity and Ambivalence, Zygmunt Bauman emphasizes in the human need to classify in order to bring order to the world we describe, but he also introduces ambivalence as a key concept, the inability to classify some phenomena because every act of classification inevitably produces exclusions and gray areas. If the human is defined by certain essential characteristics, what happens when a subcategory emerges that share many of those characteristics but not all of them, and therefore cannot be classified as part of us? In this film, the zombies become that other, the one to be feared, hated, eradicated, dominated, or as Spike's journey shows us, the one to be understood. The conflict proposed is no longer one of survival, but one about borders and how characters understand them, through fear or through curiosity. Garland is not inventing this concept in the genre. This is not the first time the zombie has been portrayed as a conscious, sensitive being. George A. Romero explored this in Day of the Dead, Return of the Living Dead, and especially Land of the Dead, where the zombie becomes a vehicle to portray a parallel society. Later, Zack Snyder, director of the Dawn of the Dead remake, would also bring this idea into Army of the Dead. What makes a concept that many consider a jump the shark moment for zombie films work in 28 years later is, first, that the film approaches it with a humanist sensitivity that never becomes ridiculous. It is cruel when exploring abuse and beautiful and philosophically stimulating when approaching life through appreciation. And second, that it uses the zombie context to speak about humanity's cycles of conquest and extermination. Danny Boyle has been explicit in describing this film as a critique of Britain's pride as an empire, its colonial expansionism, and its eventual modern isolation from Europe, and to show how through the hyperbole of this film, the world could continue to exist without it. But it also examines how a more powerful minority grants itself the right to loot natural resources, murder, hunt, and humiliate the natives of a land that does not belong to said minority, and how they construct a redemptive historical narrative based on those acts, even developing rituals and celebrations rooted in the suffering of the other. The story is therefore told through Spike's point of view. and through an odyssey inspired by Nordic Germanic folklore.
It's a big day, Spike. What do you guess?
Feel the weight. Hold it. No shake at all. Strong lad.
Good luck, Spike.
He must embark on an expedition to prove his manhood across these infected and forbidden lands, reinterpreting his world, its rules, its principles, and his identity. Like the first film, this one borrows from different genres according to its chapters, moving through multiple tonalities and avoiding being a genre film in the strict sense of adhering to aesthetic and storytelling conventions. The first act, which Spike shares with his father, is told using horror and pursuit-based suspense. Formally, it echoes the first act of 28 Days Later, where editing and the careful establishment of distance from the infected, gradually reduced through intercutting, play a crucial role in generating tension. But this act is also where the moral rules that Spike will later break are established.
And where does that arrow go? Right for his fucking neck!
Through the use of the poem Boots by Rudyard Kipling, Boyle presents his thesis clearly. The expedition into zombie territory and the indoctrination against the monster function as an allegory for nationalist militaristic indoctrination. Childhoods are hijacked early, taught to hate and exterminate the other, encouraged to feel joy in that act. The insertion of footage from the propaganda film Henry V, made to boost British morale at the end of World War II, ironically shows England's historical victory over France at the Battle of Agincourt, now mirrored in a technological reboot where the enemy is the infected. A repeating cycle of violence, territory domain, victory and defeats. Not exclusive to England but to humanity itself. Alongside images of military indoctrination, the montage constructs a clear idea. No matter the context, we will always find ways to categorize and justify the extermination or conquest of the other. And what concludes that sequence is precisely the massacre of a family, justified solely by hatred and by the rituals of this supposedly superior species. That is why the infection itself is never a pivotal element in the film. No main character dies from it, and it never functions as a story beat. It is almost inconsequential. Garland doesn't care anymore about that. Spike's arc then consists of escaping that ideological box of "it's either you or me," where dehumanization is the antithesis he must fight throughout the entire first act.
The more you kill, the easier it gets. He's got no mind, he's got no soul.
I blasted silhouettes. They're not real people, they're just targets. There's nothing there. There's a body there, but there's nothing at all there.
You feel good?
I don't think so.
You should.
I'm proud of you.
Spike's coming-of-age arc is told through story archetypes such as adolescent disillusionment with the father, typical of early adulthood. Spike loses his childish admiration for a deeply flawed parent.
Some water, love. I'll go get you some. Get the fuck away from us!
Catalyzing doubt toward all inherited customs and truths. Customs suggested to be violent at their core, and maybe that's why even their celebration anthem, Delilah by Tom Jones, is a song that at first appears romantic and joyful, but when examined, reveals itself to be about a jealous murderer. The movie uses clear visual symbols that track Spike's evolution. It uses such symbols as a subversion of story plantings and aesthetics, such as the way the infected are depicted with color, camera angles, and movements, which are supposed at first to be dark and alienating, but later become a way for him to see the vulnerability in his mother. And that's why Boyle framed her in the same color code as them, or how she is the only human character represented with this camera movement when defending her son. Or how later in the film a temple of bones that's supposed to be a creepy and horrifying promise of villainy turns out to actually be the only place filled with compassion for life. Another icon with meaning is Spike's knife, which begins as a weapon meant to kill.
Got your knife.
Good lad.
And becomes a tool to preserve life. Rejecting his father's cyclical indoctrination, Spike embraces doubt without fearing the strange, the otherness, and through this, new ideologies resolve his greatest conflict, the fear of losing his mother, an impossible problem to solve within the safe ideological box of the village, but one that becomes solvable once fear of the unknown is abandoned. And so the screenplay resolves multiple threats. Spike completes his arc of autonomy and survival, as well as his ideological autonomy in accepting the inevitable death of his mother, resignifying his world and forgiving someone who, under different circumstances, would not have deserved forgiveness. The final scene represents the temptation of Spike's new identity. If this arc is a coming-of-age story, then this new chapter will challenge what he learned in this first film, where violence once again becomes vile, disrespectful, and unnecessary. The vulgarity of the musical choice in this ending, which breaks with the tone of the rest of the score,
There were so many dead.
reflects the vulgarity that Jimmy will represent for Spike, inelegant, infantilized, and unhinged. With the context of the whole film, Jimmy's father believing this to be the beginning of a new world catalyzes the very idea that 28 years later will ultimately be real, what he perceives in his delusion as God's chosen people turning, do indeed become their own species, walking in this new genesis toward their promised land, either saved in heaven or left behind to make this land their own. The incident of the prologue, though, is that Jimmy is left behind, and in his context, surviving as a human takes on a punitive meaning. Both of his fathers abandon him, the biological and the religious, outcast from the promised land.
Papa, why have you forsaken me?
And as a result, his character accumulates an antagonistic charge. Jimmy is left alone without moral guidance on the island other than his own interpretation of this new world, trapped in a misdirected innocence and overwhelming disappointment. That's why he is dressed as the Teletubbies, or as Jimmy Savile, a popular TV host who was later accused of being an abuser. They show his misguided and perverted innocence, both born from a messianic experience, as he utters the same words Jesus Christ spoke on the cross before dying. Both Spike and Jimmy share a cathartic incident with their fathers, but the latter was unprepared to cope with it and turned his autonomy into perversion. One's ideological determinism turns him into a tragic villain, while the other completes his growth precisely by shattering his ideological determinism. Militarism for Spike and religion for Jimmy. Showing us that in this world, the blind search for meaning, the blind quest for answers and structure to the ambivalent nature of things, can turn us into monsters rather than saviors.